They say a mother's heart never stops beating for her children. What they don't tell you is how that same heart can break over and over again, day after day, until you wonder if there's anything left to shatter. My name is Dorothy Washington, but everyone at the Greyhound station calls me Miss Dot. I'm 65 years old, and for the past 2 years, I've been coming to this terminal every single day at 3:15 p.m., waiting for my daughter Andrea to come home. If you're watching this video, give it a like. Subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story from. I want to know how far this has reached, because maybe, just maybe, someone out there has seen my baby girl. It started on a Tuesday afternoon in March 2 years ago. Andrea had been struggling, lost her job at the insurance company, couldn't make rent on her little apartment downtown. She was 28 then, still trying to find her way in this world. I remember her sitting at my kitchen table, tears streaming down her face, telling me she felt like a failure. "Mama," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I think I need to go away for a while, figure things out. Maybe visit Aunt Cheryl in Phoenix." I made her favorite that night, my grandmother's mac and cheese recipe, the one with the crispy breadcrumb topping that she used to beg for as a child. We ate in comfortable silence, the way families do when words feel too heavy. I watched her savor every bite, memorizing the way her eyes closed when she tasted that first forkful, the little smile that tugged at her lips. The next morning, I drove her to the Greyhound station on Forsyth Street. The building was older than sin, with those hard plastic chairs and fluorescent lights that made everyone look sick. The smell hit you the moment you walked in. Diesel fuel mixed with industrial cleaner and something I could never quite identify. Desperation, maybe. Andrea bought a ticket to Phoenix. One way. That should have been my first warning. "I'll call when I get there," she promised, hugging me tight at the gate. She smelled like the vanilla lotion she'd used since high school, mixed with the nervousness that seemed to cling to her skin those days. "And Mama, I'll be back before you know it. This is just temporary." I watched her climb onto that bus, a small figure in her favorite denim jacket, carrying nothing but a backpack and my prayers. The bus pulled away at 4:20 p.m. exactly. I know because I checked my watch, thinking I'd remember that moment forever. I just didn't know how many times I'd be checking that same watch in the same spot, waiting for her to come back. The first month, I came to the station maybe twice a week, casual-like, just checking to see if maybe she'd surprise me, show up early. The security guard, Guillermo, started recognizing me. Nice man, maybe 50, with kind eyes and a gentle way of speaking that reminded me of my late husband Marcus. "Still no word from your daughter?" he'd ask, and I'd shake my head, trying to keep that hopeful smile on my face. By the second month, I was there every other day. By the third month, every day. Always at 3:15 p.m. because that's when the Phoenix bus was scheduled to arrive. Even though the schedule had changed twice since Andrea left, even though logic told me she wouldn't come back on the same route she'd taken to leave. Hope doesn't follow logic, though. Hope follows a mother's heart. The other passengers started noticing me. Some whispered. I could see them cutting their eyes in my direction, probably wondering about the old black woman who sat in the same plastic chair every afternoon, clutching her purse and checking the arrivals board every few minutes. Others were kinder. There was this young mother with twin boys who'd smile at me while she corralled her children, understanding something in my stillness that the whispers couldn't touch. But it was Guillermo who really saw me. After about 6 months, he started bringing me coffee from the vending machine. Nothing fancy, just that terrible brown water they called coffee, but served with such genuine kindness that it tasted like the finest brew. "My mother used to wait like this," he told me one rainy afternoon in October. "When my brother went to Vietnam, she'd sit by the window every day, watching for the mail truck. Some kinds of waiting, they get into your bones." I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. The waiting had gotten into my bones, settling there like arthritis, aching on cold days and flaring up when the weather changed. But I couldn't stop. Because what if today was the day? What if I wasn't there when she needed me most? The other thing I hadn't counted on was my son Ivan's reaction. Ivan was 32, married to Michelle for 3 years, working as a manager at the Ford dealership on the north side of town. He was my practical child, the one who'd always followed rules, made sensible choices, graduated college on time, and bought a house in a nice neighborhood with good schools for the children he and Michelle were planning to have. He was also the child who felt like he'd been living in Andrea's shadow his entire life. "Mama, this is getting ridiculous," he said during one of his increasingly rare visits to my house. We were sitting in my living room, the same room where I'd raised both my children, surrounded by family photos that seemed to mock his frustration. "She's been gone 8 months. 8 months, and not so much as a phone call. Don't you think it's time to accept that maybe she doesn't want to be found?" The words hit me like a physical blow. I set down my teacup with shaking hands, the delicate china my mother had given me rattling against the saucer. "Ivan Marcus Washington," I said, using his full name the way I had when he was 7 and had broken my favorite lamp-playing ball in the house. "That is your sister you're talking about." "That's my sister who left without looking back," he shot back, his voice rising. "My sister who's letting you waste away in that bus station every day while I'm here trying to take care of you. When's the last time you cooked a real meal, Mama? When's the last time you went to church? Sister May called me yesterday asking if you were okay because you haven't been to choir practice in months." I wanted to argue with him, but the truth was sitting heavy in my chest. I had lost weight. My clothes hung looser, and I'd started using the last notch on my favorite belt. I'd been living on saltine crackers and whatever Guillermo brought me from the vending machines. Church had started feeling impossible when every gospel song about Jesus bringing his children home made me cry until I couldn't catch my breath. But none of that mattered more than being there when Andrea came home. "She's coming back," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "A mother knows these things, Ivan. She's coming back, and I'm going to be there when she does." Ivan stood up abruptly, his face twisted with something I'd never seen before. Pain, maybe, or jealousy that had been festering for years. "You were never this loyal to me," he said quietly. "When I graduated valedictorian, you missed the ceremony because Andrea had the flu and needed someone to bring her soup. When I got promoted to manager, you talked about it for 5 minutes before asking if I'd heard from her. Even at my own wedding, you spent half the reception checking your phone in case she called." The accusation hung in the air between us like smoke, stinging my eyes and making it hard to breathe. Because wasn't there some truth to it? Hadn't Andrea always been my baby, the one who needed more, demanded more, got more of my worry and attention? But that was because Ivan had never needed me the way she did. Ivan was strong, capable, steady. Andrea was like a bird with a broken wing, beautiful and fragile, and always one strong wind away from falling. "It's not the same thing," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it?" Ivan asked. He was standing by the mantel now, looking at the photographs arranged there. Pictures of Andrea's high school graduation, her brief stint in college, her first job. Pictures of Ivan, too. But somehow they seemed smaller, less prominent. When had that happened? "I love you both," I said finally. "I know you do, Mama. But loving us the same and showing it the same are two different things." He left after that, and I sat in my empty living room until the shadows grew long and it was time to check the locks and turn off the lights. The house felt bigger that night, echoing with all the words we'd said and all the ones we hadn't. But the next day at 3:15, I was back at the station, sitting in my usual spot, watching the buses pull in and hoping to see a familiar figure in a denim jacket stepping down onto the platform. Because hope, like love, doesn't follow logic. It follows a mother's heart, even when that heart is breaking into smaller and smaller pieces with each passing day. If I thought Ivan's words had cut deep, I wasn't prepared for what his wife Michelle had in store for me. Michelle was the kind of woman who smiled with her mouth, but never with her eyes. She was pretty in that sharp, calculated way, always perfectly put together, always knowing exactly what to say to make you feel smaller without being able to pinpoint exactly how she'd done it. Ivan had met her at some work conference in Birmingham, and she'd swept him off his feet with her business degree and her 5-year plan and her very clear ideas about how a successful couple should live their lives. Those ideas, as it turned out, didn't include an elderly mother-in-law who spent her days at a bus station. The first time Michelle really showed her true colors was on a Thursday in November, almost a year after Andrea had left. Ivan had been bringing me groceries every 2 weeks, basic things like bread and milk and canned soup, because I'd been forgetting to eat proper meals. That day, Michelle came with him. I was sitting at my kitchen table when they walked in, looking through old photo albums. I'd been doing that more lately, trying to remember Andrea's laugh, the way she used to dance around this very kitchen while I cooked Sunday dinner. The photos were spread across the table like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't quite solve. "Oh my goodness," Michelle said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Dorothy, honey, what is all this?" The way she said my name, not Mama Dorothy or Mrs. Washington, like respectful young women used to say, just Dorothy, made something clench in my stomach. "Just looking at some old pictures," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Michelle picked up a photo of Andrea from her college graduation, the one where she was laughing at something someone had said off camera. Her cap was slightly crooked, and she had that radiant smile that used to light up every room she entered. "She really was beautiful," Michelle said, but there was something cold in her voice. "It's such a shame she turned out to be so selfish." The words hit me like ice water. "Excuse me?" "Well, think about it," Michelle continued, setting the photo down carelessly. "What kind of daughter leaves her mother like this? What kind of person doesn't call for almost a year? I mean, if something had happened to her, wouldn't someone have contacted you by now?" Ivan was standing behind her, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, not meeting my eyes. He'd obviously heard this speech before. "She's probably fine," Michelle went on, picking up another photo, this one of Andrea and me at the state fair when she was 16. "Probably started over somewhere new, maybe met someone. Some people just walk away from their families when things get complicated. You know, it's actually more common than you'd think." I wanted to argue, wanted to defend my daughter, but something about the casual cruelty in Michelle's voice had stolen all my words. She spoke about Andrea's absence like it was a known fact, like she had insider information about my daughter's choices that I somehow lacked. "The thing is," Michelle continued, now looking directly at me with those cold, calculating eyes, "Ivan is worried sick about you. We both are. This whole situation. It's not healthy, Dorothy. Sitting at that bus station every day, neglecting your health, your home, your other relationships. It's like you're not even living anymore." "I'm fine," I managed to say. "Are you, though?" She gestured around my kitchen, and I suddenly saw it through her eyes. The dishes I'd left in the sink, the mail piled up on the counter, the way the whole house had started to feel like a museum of my old life rather than a place where I actually lived. "When's the last time you had a real conversation with Ivan?" Michelle asked. "When's the last time you asked about our plans, our future? Did you know we've been trying to have a baby for 6 months? Did you know Ivan got another promotion at work?" The guilt hit me like a sledgehammer. I hadn't known about the baby, hadn't asked about the promotion. I'd been so wrapped up in my vigil at the station that I'd let my relationship with my living child wither like a plant I'd forgotten to water. I didn't know," I whispered. "Of course you didn't," Michelle said, but not unkindly. That was the worst part. She sounded genuinely sorry for me. "Because you're not really here anymore, are you? You're living in some fantasy where Andrea comes back and everything goes back to the way it was. But life doesn't work that way, Dorothy. Life moves forward, whether we're ready or not." Ivan finally spoke up. "Mama, we think maybe it's time to consider some changes." "What kind of changes?" Michelle and Ivan exchanged a look that made my blood run cold. "Well," Michelle said carefully, "your house is getting to be too much for you to maintain. And all this time you're spending at the station, maybe if you weren't there every day, you could start healing, start moving forward." "You want me to stop going to the station," I said. It wasn't a question. "We want you to stop hurting yourself," Ivan said, and his voice cracked slightly. "Mama, you've lost 20 pounds. Your neighbor called me last week because she found you passed out in your garden. Dr. Williams says your blood pressure is through the roof." I had passed out in the garden. I remembered waking up on the ground next to my tomato plants, Mrs. Henderson from next door kneeling beside me with a glass of water and a worried expression. But I'd brushed it off, told her I'd just gotten overheated. "What we're thinking," Michelle continued, "is that maybe you could come stay with us for a while, just until you get back on your feet. We have that nice guest room, and I could help you get back into a routine. Regular meals, medication reminders. Maybe we could find you some activities." "I'm not an invalid," I said sharply. "Of course not," Michelle said quickly. "But you're not taking care of yourself either. And honestly, Dorothy, this whole thing with the bus station, people are starting to talk." That's when she pulled out her phone. "I wasn't going to show you this," she said, but her fingers were already swiping across the screen. "But maybe you need to see how this looks to other people." She turned the phone toward me, and I saw myself on the screen. Someone had taken a video of me sitting in the terminal, probably with their phone from across the waiting area. I looked smaller than I remembered. Hunched in that plastic chair, my purse clutched in my lap like armor. The caption read, "This lady has been coming to the Greyhound station every day for months. Someone said she's waiting for her daughter who left town. Kind of sad TBH. The video had been viewed over 8,000 times. The comments were even worse. Poor thing. She needs help. This is actually really depressing. Someone should call social services. My grandmother did stuff like this when she got dementia." Dementia. The word hung in the air like a curse. "I don't have dementia," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. "I know you don't," Ivan said quickly. "But Mama, can you see how this looks? Can you see why we're worried?" I looked at the photo album spread across my table, at my son and his wife standing in my kitchen like they were planning an intervention, at my own reflection in the dark window above the sink. When had I gotten so thin? When had my eyes gotten so hollow? "I just need to be there when she comes home," I said, and I hated how small my voice sounded. "But what if she doesn't?" Michelle asked, and there was something almost cruel in her gentleness. "What if she's not coming back?" "Dorothy? What if you're wasting what's left of your life waiting for something that's never going to happen?" The question hung in the air like smoke, choking me. Because wasn't that the fear I'd been carrying all along? The possibility that had been gnawing at the edges of my hope for months? "She's coming back," I said, but even I could hear the doubt creeping into my voice. "Okay," Michelle said, but her tone suggested she didn't believe me. "But what if she does come back and finds out that waiting for her made you sick? What if she comes home and you're not here because all this stress gave you a heart attack or a stroke? How do you think she'd feel about that?" I'd never thought about it that way. I'd been so focused on being there for Andrea that I hadn't considered what she'd think if her homecoming was overshadowed by the damage her absence had caused. "Just think about it," Ivan said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "Think about coming to stay with us for a while. Just until you're feeling stronger." They left soon after that, taking my groceries to the kitchen and making sure I had Ivan's work number written down by the phone. Michelle hugged me goodbye. A quick, perfunctory embrace that smelled like expensive perfume and felt like obligation. After they left, I sat in my kitchen surrounded by Andrea's photos until the streetlights came on outside. I tried to remember the last time I'd felt truly happy, truly alive, and realized it had been the morning I'd made Andrea that last batch of mac and cheese before she left for Phoenix. Everything since then had been a kind of sleepwalking, a suspended animation where I went through the motions of living while waiting for my real life to resume. But that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Michelle's words echoed in my mind. "What if you're wasting what's left of your life waiting for something that's never going to happen?" For the first time in almost a year, I allowed myself to consider the possibility that she might be right. I lasted 3 days at Ivan and Michelle's house before I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. Their guest room was nice enough. Cream-colored walls, a queen-size bed with a floral comforter that smelled like fabric softener, and a window that looked out onto their perfectly manicured backyard. But it felt like a hotel room, sterile and temporary, a place where you stayed until you could get back to your real life. The first morning, I woke up at 6 a.m. out of habit, my body clock still set to the routine I'd developed over 2 years of station visits. I'd always been an early riser. Marcus used to joke that I was up before the roosters. But in my own house, those quiet morning hours had belonged to me. I'd make coffee, sit at my kitchen table, and watch the sunrise paint the sky while I planned my day around that 3:15 p.m. appointment at the terminal. But in Ivan's house, my early rising felt like an intrusion. The floorboards creaked when I walked to the bathroom. The coffee maker sounded like a freight train in the quiet kitchen. When I settled into their living room with a cup of that weak coffee Michelle preferred, I felt like I was trespassing in someone else's life. Michelle came downstairs at 7:30, already dressed for work in one of those sharp business suits that made her look like she could cut you with her shoulder pads. She moved through the kitchen with efficient precision, making herself a protein smoothie and checking her phone while the blender whirred. "How did you sleep?" she asked, but her eyes never left her screen. "Fine," I lied. The truth was, I'd laid awake most of the night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of their house, the hum of their central air, the distant sound of traffic from the highway, the absence of all the small noises that had become the soundtrack of my life. "Good," Michelle said, taking a long sip of her green smoothie. "I left you a schedule on the refrigerator. Ivan thought it might help you get back into a routine." The schedule was color-coded and laminated. Breakfast at 8 a.m., light exercise at 9 a.m., productive activities from 10 a.m. to noon, lunch at 12:30, rest time from 1 to 3 p.m. The 3 to 4 p.m. slot, the hour when I should have been at the terminal, was labeled meditation reflection. This is very organized, I said. Structure is important for healing, Michelle replied, rinsing her smoothie glass with mechanical precision. I read several articles about it online. People who are grieving. I'm not grieving, I said quickly. Andrea isn't dead. Michelle paused, her hand still on the glass. Of course not. Poor choice of words. People who are adjusting to major life changes. Structure helps with the adjustment process. Ivan came downstairs a few minutes later, already dressed for work. He kissed Michelle goodbye, a quick peck that seemed more routine than romantic, and squeezed my shoulder as he grabbed his coffee travel mug. How are you feeling this morning? Mama? Like a stranger in a strange land, I wanted to say. Instead, I smiled and said, much better. Thank you both for letting me stay here. Of course, Ivan said, but he was already checking his watch. Michelle's working from home today, so she'll be here if you need anything. I'll be back around 6. And then he was gone, leaving me alone with his wife and her laminated schedule. The first few days followed that same pattern. Michelle would work in her home office, a converted bedroom that was all glass desk and motivational posters about crushing your goals, while I wandered through their house like a ghost, trying to find ways to fill the hours that used to be occupied by my vigil at the station. I tried to follow the schedule. I really did. I ate breakfast at 8 a.m., even though I wasn't hungry. I walked around their neighborhood for 30 minutes, admiring the identical houses with their identical lawns and identical mailboxes. I read magazines during productive activities time, though none of the articles about celebrity diets and home organization tips seemed to have anything to do with my life. But it was during meditation reflection time that the real torture began, because that's when my body would start preparing for the trip to the station, when my hands would reach for my purse and my feet would head toward the door, only to remember that I wasn't allowed to go anymore. It's for your own good, Michelle would say, when she caught me standing by the window during that hour, watching the street like I was expecting someone. You're breaking the cycle. In a few weeks, you won't even think about it anymore. But she was wrong. I thought about it constantly. I thought about Guillermo, wondering if he missed our afternoon conversations. I thought about the young mother with the twin boys, hoping someone else was smiling at her when she needed it. Most of all, I thought about Andrea, imagining her stepping off a bus to find an empty plastic chair where her mother should have been. The worst part was dinner time. Michelle was actually a decent cook, but everything she made tasted like it came from a magazine. Perfectly presented, nutritionally balanced, and completely devoid of soul. She'd serve these beautiful plates of grilled chicken and quinoa and steamed vegetables, and Ivan would compliment her effort, and I'd sit there pushing food around while they talked about their work and their plans and their perfectly organized life. One evening, about a week into my stay, I finally couldn't take it anymore. Would it be okay if I cooked dinner tomorrow night? I asked. As a thank you for everything you've done? Michelle and Ivan exchanged one of their looks, the kind married couples develop when they've learned to have entire conversations with their eyes. That's very sweet of you, Michelle said carefully. But you don't need to. I want to, I said, and I could hear the desperation in my own voice. I haven't cooked a real meal in months. I miss it. What were you thinking of making? Ivan asked, and something in his tone made me look at him more closely. There was a softness there I hadn't seen in a long time, a flicker of the little boy who used to stand on a step stool beside me in the kitchen, helping me stir pots and taste sauces. My grandmother's mac and cheese, I said without thinking, the one with the crispy breadcrumbs on top, Ivan finished, and his voice was barely above a whisper. For a moment, we just looked at each other across Michelle's perfect dining room table, and I saw something crack in his composure. He was remembering too, those Sunday afternoons when I'd make that mac and cheese as a special treat, how he and Andrea would fight over who got the corner pieces with the most breadcrumbs, how the whole house would smell like comfort and love. I don't think that's a good idea, Michelle said quickly, breaking the spell. Dorothy, you're supposed to be reducing stress, not taking on additional responsibilities. And honestly, that kind of heavy carb-loaded food isn't really what we eat anymore. We're trying to maintain a healthier lifestyle. The dismissal stung more than it should have. My grandmother's recipe had been in our family for 4 generations. It was the dish I'd made for every celebration, every heartbreak, every moment when love needed to be expressed in a language deeper than words. And Michelle was reducing it to carb-loaded. Of course, I said quietly. I understand. But Ivan was still looking at me with that expression of longing, and I realized that maybe he was just as homesick as I was, even though he was sitting in his own house. The breaking point came 3 days later, on a Tuesday afternoon that felt exactly like every other Tuesday afternoon in their sterile, scheduled world. I was in the guest room, supposedly napping during rest time, when I heard Michelle on the phone in her office. I know, she was saying, her voice carrying through the thin walls. It's only been 10 days, but honestly, Laura, I don't know how much more of this I can take. She just sits there all day looking miserable, like we're torturing her instead of helping her. I pressed my ear to the wall, my heart pounding. No, Ivan doesn't see it. He feels too guilty, but she's not getting better. If anything, she's getting worse. And the way she looks at us, like we're the villains in this story. I'm trying to help her move on, and she acts like I'm asking her to abandon her child. There was a pause while whoever Laura was responded. I don't know, Michelle continued. Maybe we need to look into other options. There are some really nice assisted living facilities in the area, places with activities and social interaction. She'd probably be happier around people her own age, people who understand what she's going through. Assisted living. The words hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just trying to keep me away from the station. They were planning to put me away completely. I must have made some sound, because Michelle's voice suddenly got quieter, more careful. Look, I have to go, she said. But think about what I said about your mom's situation last year. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is make the hard decision for them. I crept back to the bed and lay there with my eyes closed, pretending to sleep while my mind raced. How long had they been planning this? How long had I been living under their roof as an unwelcome guest, a problem to be managed rather than a mother to be loved? That evening at dinner, I watched them differently. I saw the way Michelle's smiles never quite reached her eyes, the way Ivan seemed to be going through the motions of filial duty rather than genuine care. I saw myself as they saw me, a broken old woman who was disrupting their perfect life with my inconvenient grief and my stubborn hope. I've been thinking, I said, as Michelle served her latest creation, some kind of fish with a sauce that probably had a French name I couldn't pronounce. Maybe I'm ready to go back to my house. Are you sure? Ivan asked. But there was relief in his voice. We don't want you to feel like you have to. I'm sure, I said, cutting him off. I appreciate everything you've done, but I think I need to be in my own space to really heal. Michelle nodded approvingly. That's a very mature perspective, Dorothy. Sometimes we have to step outside our comfort zone to grow. But eventually, we need to return to what feels authentic to us. She had no idea how authentic she'd just been. Or maybe she did. That night, lying in their guest room for what I hoped would be the last time, I made a decision that surprised even me. I wasn't just going to go home. I was going to go back to the station. Because whatever Michelle thought, whatever Ivan believed, whatever that cruel video and its comments suggested, I knew something they didn't. A mother's heart doesn't stop hoping just because other people think it should. And maybe, just maybe, hope was the only thing I had left that was truly mine. Going back to my own house felt like putting on clothes that had been hanging in the closet too long. Familiar, but somehow different than I remembered. Ivan drove me home on a Saturday morning, loading my few belongings into the back of his truck with the careful efficiency of someone completing an unpleasant but necessary task. Michelle had said goodbye at the house, giving me another one of those quick, obligatory hugs and reminding me that I had their number if I needed anything. What I needed was to feel like myself again, but I didn't tell her that. The house smelled like closed windows and accumulated dust, with just a hint of the vanilla candles I used to burn in the evenings. Ivan helped me carry my suitcase to the bedroom, then stood in my living room looking uncomfortable, like he wasn't sure whether he should stay or go. The refrigerator's empty, he said finally. I could run to the store, get you some basics. I can manage, I told him, though we both knew the nearest grocery store was a 15-minute drive, and I hadn't been behind the wheel of my car in weeks. Mama! He sat down heavily on my sofa, the same green sectional where he'd done homework as a child, where Andrea had curled up to watch cartoons on Saturday mornings. I need you to promise me something. I knew what was coming, but I let him say it anyway. Promise me you won't go back to the station every day. Please, just maybe once a week, or when you're feeling strong enough. The request hung between us like a bridge neither of us wanted to cross. I could have lied. I could have told him what he wanted to hear, bought myself some peace and time, but I was tired of pretending, tired of living my life according to other people's ideas of what was healthy or reasonable or sane. I can't promise that, I said quietly. Ivan's face fell. Mama, no, let me finish. I sat down across from him, my hands folded in my lap, the way my own mother had taught me when I had something important to say. I know you think what I'm doing is crazy. I know Michelle thinks I need professional help. Maybe you're both right. But Ivan, that station is where I last saw your sister. It's where she promised me she'd come back to. And until I know for certain that she's not coming back, I have to be there. But what if she doesn't come back? He asked. And his voice cracked like it had when he was 13, and asking me why his father had to die so young. What if you wait the rest of your life and she never shows up? What happens to you then? It was the same question Michelle had asked. But coming from Ivan, it sounded different. Less like an accusation and more like genuine fear. Then at least I'll know I didn't give up on her, I said. But Ivan, honey, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about Andrea. This is about who I am. I'm her mother. That doesn't stop being true just because she's been gone for 2 years. And a mother doesn't abandon her children, no matter how old they get, no matter how long they're gone. Ivan was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. When he finally looked up, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. I used to be so jealous of her, he said softly. Growing up, it always felt like she was your favorite. She was the one who needed more attention, more help, more everything. And I told myself it didn't matter because I was the strong one, the responsible one. I didn't need you the way she did. My heart clenched. Ivan, but I did need you, he continued. I needed you to be proud of me, to notice my accomplishments, to worry about me sometimes. And when she left and you started spending all your time at that station, it felt like she was still getting all your attention. Even when she wasn't here, the truth of his words hit me like a physical blow. I had been so focused on my absent daughter that I'd neglected my present son. In trying to be there for Andrea, I'd failed to be there for Ivan. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'm so sorry, baby. I never meant to make you feel that way. I know you didn't, Ivan said. But Mama, I can't watch you disappear into this waiting anymore. It's killing me to see you waste away, and it's killing me to feel like I'm competing with a ghost for my own mother's love. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of years of unspoken hurt settling between us. Finally, Ivan stood up. I'll bring you some groceries tomorrow, he said, and I'll call to check on you. But Mama, please try to take care of yourself. For me, if not for you. After he left, I walked through my house like I was seeing it for the first time. The walls were covered with family photos, births and graduations and holidays spanning decades. But looking at them now, I could see what Ivan had seen. Andrea featured prominently in almost every frame, while Ivan seemed to fade into the background, the steady presence taken for granted. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in almost 2 years. I cooked myself a real meal, not the elaborate spread I used to make for Sunday dinners, but something simple and comforting. Fried chicken and green beans, cornbread from a mix I found in the back of my pantry. I set the table for one, said grace over my plate, and ate slowly, tasting each bite. It was the first food that had had any flavor since Andrea left. The next Monday, I went back to the station. Guillermo's face lit up when he saw me walk through the sliding glass doors. Miss Dot, he said, coming around from behind his security desk to give me a hug that smelled like coffee and kindness. Where have you been? I was starting to worry. Family obligations, I said, which was true enough. How have you been? Same old, same old. But it hasn't been the same without you here. The afternoon shift feels too quiet. I settled into my usual chair. Someone had carved initials into the plastic armrest while I was gone, but it still felt like home, and realized how much I'd missed this place. The familiar sounds of announcements echoing through the terminal, the diesel smell of idling buses, the constant flow of people arriving and departing, carrying their own stories of reunion and goodbye. But something had changed during my absence. Maybe it was the time I'd spent away, or maybe it was the conversation with Ivan. but I found myself really looking at the other people in the waiting area for the first time. The elderly man in the corner who came every Tuesday, checking the arrivals board with the same desperate hope I recognized in my own face. The young woman with the baby who always sat by the window, scanning every face that walked through the door. We were all waiting for someone. We were all carrying the weight of absence, the burden of hope. Around 4:30, a bus pulled in from Birmingham. I watched the passengers disembark with my usual mixture of anticipation and dread, looking for Andrea's familiar silhouette among the strangers. But instead of disappointment when she wasn't there, I felt something unexpected, a kind of peace. She wasn't on this bus, but she might be on the next one, or the one after that. And I would be here when she arrived, whenever that was. But I would also still be living in the meantime. The next few weeks fell into a new rhythm. I went to the station every day, but I also started going to other places. The grocery store, where I bought ingredients for meals I actually planned to eat. The library, where I checked out books I'd been meaning to read for years. Church, where Sister May welcomed me back with tears in her eyes and assigned me to help with the Christmas pageant. Ivan kept his promise about the groceries and the phone calls, and slowly, carefully, we began to rebuild something that felt like a real relationship. I asked about his work, his marriage, his dreams of becoming a father. He told me about the promotion he'd been offered, the house he and Michelle were thinking of buying, the nursery they'd started planning even though there was no baby yet. For the first time in years, I felt like I was getting to know my son as an adult, instead of just as Andrea's brother. But it was Dr. Williams who delivered the news that changed everything. I'd been having some chest pains, nothing dramatic, just a tightness that came and went, especially when I walked up the stairs or carried heavy grocery bags. I'd been ignoring it, the way you ignore a leaky faucet or a squeaky door. Something you know needs attention but isn't urgent enough to deal with immediately. Ivan, however, had noticed me rubbing my chest during one of his visits, and he'd insisted on making me an appointment. "Dorothy," Dr. Williams said after reviewing my test results, his voice gentle but serious. "I'm afraid we need to talk about your heart." The irony wasn't lost on me. After 2 years of people telling me that my heart was broken, it turned out to be literally true. "How bad is it?" I asked. "You've had some damage, likely a mild heart attack sometime in the past few months that you may not have recognized. Your heart muscle is weakened, and there are some concerning irregularities in your rhythm." He went on to explain treatment options, lifestyle changes, medications. But what I heard underneath all the medical terminology was time. Not a specific number, he couldn't give me that, but the understanding that my remaining time was limited and uncertain. "I need to ask you something," I said when he finished his explanation. "If I were to keep up my regular activities, my daily routine, how long might I have?" Dr. Williams frowned. "Dorothy, with proper treatment and some modifications to your lifestyle." "How long?" I repeated. He was quiet for a moment, studying my chart. "With your current habits? 6 months to a year, maybe less if you don't make some changes. With treatment and rest, possibly several years." I thanked him, took the prescriptions he offered, and promised to think about what he'd said. But as I drove home from his office, I already knew what I was going to do. I was going to keep going to the station. I was going to keep waiting for Andrea, because if my time was limited, I wasn't going to spend whatever days I had left wondering what might have happened if I'd given up too soon. That night, I called Ivan and asked him to come over. There were things I needed to tell him, things I needed to make sure he understood while I still had the chance. Ivan arrived within 30 minutes of my call, his face tight with worry. He still had his work clothes on, khakis and a polo shirt with the Ford logo, and his hair was messed up like he'd been running his hands through it during the drive over. "What's wrong?" he asked, before he'd even made it through the front door. "You sounded strange on the phone." I led him to the living room, the same place where we'd had so many difficult conversations over the past 2 years. But this time felt different. This time, I was the one with news to deliver. "Sit down, baby," I said, patting the cushion beside me on the sofa. "Mama, you're scaring me." I took his hands in mine. When had they gotten so much bigger than mine? When had the little boy who used to climb into my lap for comfort become this grown man with calluses and worry lines around his eyes? "I went to see Dr. Williams today," I began. Ivan's face went pale. "And?" "My heart is failing, honey. I had a heart attack sometime in the past few months, a mild one that I didn't recognize at the time. But there's been damage." The words hung in the air between us like a death sentence, which I supposed they were. How long? Ivan's voice was barely above a whisper. 6 months to a year, maybe less, possibly longer with treatment and lifestyle changes. Ivan was quiet for a long time, staring at our joined hands. When he finally looked up, his eyes were bright with tears. "What kind of lifestyle changes?" he asked. I knew what he was really asking. I knew what Dr. Williams had suggested, what any reasonable person would recommend. Rest, reduced stress, no more daily trips to the bus station, no more waiting for a daughter who might never come home. "Ivan," I said gently, "I need you to understand something. I'm not going to spend whatever time I have left sitting in a rocking chair, taking pills and pretending that my life is over. I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing. I'm going to keep going to the station. Mama." "No." Ivan pulled his hands away, standing up abruptly. "No, you can't. The doctor said I might have longer with treatment. But what kind of life would that be? Sitting around, waiting to die instead of waiting for Andrea? At least at the station, I'm living with purpose. Your purpose should be taking care of yourself." Ivan's voice cracked with frustration. "Your purpose should be being here for the people who are already in your life." I could see the little boy in him then. The child who'd always felt like he had to compete for my attention, who'd grown up believing that love was a finite resource that had to be rationed carefully. "Come here," I said, patting the sofa again. Reluctantly, he sat back down. "Ivan, I need to tell you something I should have said a long time ago. You are not second place in my heart. You never were. You and Andrea, you're different children with different needs, and maybe I didn't always handle that well. But my love for you isn't less because I worry about her more." "But you do worry about her more," Ivan said quietly. "Yes," I admitted, "because she needs more worrying. You, my strong, capable, wonderful son, you've never given me a reason to worry. You graduated valedictorian, you went to college, you got a good job, married a nice girl, bought a house, you built a life I could be proud of. Andrea was always struggling, always searching for something she couldn't name. Of course I worried about her more." Ivan was crying now, silent tears that he wiped away with the back of his hand. "When she left," I continued, "it felt like leaving someone behind on a battlefield. I couldn't stop fighting for her, couldn't stop believing she'd find her way home. But Ivan, that doesn't mean I love you less. It means I trust you more. I trust you to be okay, to be strong, to take care of yourself, even when I can't be there to do it." "But what if I don't want to be strong all the time?" Ivan asked, his voice small. "What if sometimes I want to be the one who needs taking care of?" My heart broke a little more, but in a different way than it had been breaking for the past 2 years. This was the ache of recognition, of seeing clearly something I'd been blind to for too long. "Then you tell me," I said. "You come to me and you say, 'Mama, I need you.' And I'll be there. For as long as I can be, I'll be there." We sat together in comfortable silence for a while, and I realized this was the first real conversation Ivan and I had ever had about love and need and the complicated mathematics of family loyalty. "I have some other things I need to tell you," I said finally. "Practical things." Ivan nodded, wiping his eyes. "I've updated my will. The house goes to you, along with most of my savings. There's a letter for Andrea in my jewelry box. When she comes home, I want you to give it to her. And there's something else." I got up and went to the kitchen, returning with a worn index card covered in my grandmother's careful handwriting. "The mac and cheese recipe," I said, handing it to Ivan. "I want you to have it. I want you to make it for your children someday and tell them about their grandmother who waited at a bus station because love doesn't follow logic." Ivan took the card with shaking hands, studying the faded writing. "I remember watching you make this," he said, "standing on that step stool helping you stir. You were such a good helper," I said. "You still are, taking care of me all these months, even when you didn't understand why I was doing what I was doing. That's love too, Ivan. That's what makes you my son." We talked until almost midnight, about childhood memories, about his dreams of becoming a father, about the ways we'd hurt each other and the ways we'd heal. When he finally left, hugging me tighter and longer than he had in years, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. The next morning, I went to the station as usual, but instead of my typical routine of silent waiting, I found myself talking to Guillermo, really talking. I learned that he had 3 daughters, that his youngest was studying to be a nurse, that he'd been working security for 12 years and still loved the daily interactions with travelers. "You know what I've always admired about you, Miss Dot?" he said as we shared our afternoon coffee. "You never stopped believing. In a world where people give up on each other all the time, you never stopped believing your daughter would come home." "Sometimes believing is all we have," I said. "Sometimes believing is enough." That afternoon, as I sat in my usual plastic chair watching the 4:15 bus from Phoenix pull into the terminal, something felt different. The air seemed charged with possibility, the way it does before a thunderstorm. I found myself sitting forward, my heart beating faster than it had in months. The bus doors opened with their usual hydraulic hiss, and passengers began filing out. A businessman with a briefcase, an elderly couple helping each other down the steep steps, a young mother with a crying baby. And then, like a prayer answered, like hope made flesh, I saw her. Andrea stepped off that bus looking thinner than I remembered, older, with new lines around her eyes and her hair cut shorter than she'd worn it since high school. She was carrying a different backpack, wearing clothes I'd never seen before. But when her eyes found mine across that crowded terminal, when recognition dawned on her face like sunrise, she was still my baby girl. "Mama!" she called out, her voice uncertain, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. I stood up so fast, my purse fell to the floor, scattering its contents across the tile. But I didn't care about anything except getting to my daughter, except closing the distance that had stretched between us for 2 years and 7 months and 16 days. "Andrea," I breathed. And then she was running toward me, and I was running toward her, and we were colliding in the middle of that terminal in a hug that felt like coming back to life. She smelled different, like unfamiliar soap and train travel and the salty residue of tears. But underneath all of that, she still smelled like my daughter. She still felt like the child I'd carried in my body, the baby I'd rocked to sleep, the little girl who'd grown up in my kitchen learning to make mac and cheese. "I'm sorry," she sobbed against my shoulder. "Mama, I'm so sorry. I meant to call, I meant to write, but everything got so complicated, and then so much time had passed, and I didn't know how to explain." "Shh," I said, stroking her hair the way I had when she was small and woke up from nightmares. "You're here now. That's all that matters. You're here." "I was in a coma," she said, pulling back to look at me, "for 8 months. Car accident in New Mexico. When I woke up, I didn't remember everything right away. It took me this long to get well enough to travel, to remember everything clearly. But I remembered you, Mama. I remembered that I promised to come back to this station." A coma. 8 months unconscious, hovering between life and death while I sat in this terminal, believing she was living her life somewhere without me. All those people who'd told me to give up, who'd said she was selfish or thoughtless or deliberately cruel, they'd been wrong. She hadn't abandoned me. She'd been fighting her way back to me. "I knew you'd be here," she whispered. "Even after all this time, I knew you'd still be waiting." "A mother's heart never stops hoping," I said, the words coming from somewhere deeper than thought. "Never stops believing, never stops waiting." We stood there holding each other while the terminal bustled around us, while other people rushed to catch buses or reunited with their own loved ones or said their own difficult goodbyes. Guillermo was watching from his security station, tears streaming down his face. Even some of the other passengers had stopped to witness our reunion, understanding instinctively that they were seeing something rare and sacred. Love that endures, hope that persists, faith that transforms waiting into a kind of worship. "Let's go home," I said finally. Andrea nodded, wiping her eyes. "I'd like that, but Mama, you look tired. Are you okay?" I thought about Dr. Williams's diagnosis, about the failing heart in my chest, about the limited time that stretched ahead of us. But looking at my daughter's face, seeing the love and concern there, I realized that none of that mattered now. Whatever time I had left, I wouldn't be spending it alone. I wouldn't be spending it waiting. "I'm perfect now," I said, and meant it. As we walked out of that terminal together, Andrea's arm linked through mine. I thought about all the people who'd told me to give up. Yvonne, who'd worried I was wasting my life. Michelle, who'd called my vigil unhealthy. The strangers who'd made cruel comments on that video, who'd suggested I needed professional help. They'd all misunderstood something fundamental about love, about faith, about the bond between a mother and child. They'd seen my waiting as weakness when it was actually the strongest thing I'd ever done. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever faced something like this in your own family? Please share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to tell me what city you're watching from. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more real stories like this one. Thank you so much for listening until the very end. This is Letters to Helen, and I'll see you in the next story. Sometimes love looks like letting go. Sometimes it looks like holding on. Sometimes it looks like sitting in a plastic chair in a bus terminal for 2 years and 7 months, refusing to believe that hope is foolish or that faith is wasted. Sometimes love looks like waiting, until waiting becomes praying, until praying becomes truth. My daughter came home. Not because I waited for her, but because love, real love, the kind that runs deeper than logic or reason or other people's opinions, that kind of love always finds its way home. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, home finds its way back to you.